Wakanda Forever is really freaking great. I think you could make the argument that it's a better, more complex movie than the first Black Panther film. But one criticism I constantly see it hit with, far and away the most consistent critique lobbied at it in fact, is disparaging the presence of one Julia Louise Dreyfus as Valentina Allegra Defontaine within the film. If the general consensus agrees on any one aspect of the film that drags it down, it's her. It's an argument so pervasive that I'm here dedicating a video to breaking down each of the common stances against her inclusion. Because frankly, I think she makes the movie better with her presence, and obviously I'm correct always, and I need to educate those who have bad opinions. Starting with what I think is the most shallow and unsubstantiated of the complaints against Val in this film, the idea that her being here stops Wakanda Forever's story in its tracks to advertise a future Marvel product, namely the Thunderbolts, and just no? None of Val's scenes, not a single line of her dialogue, is dedicated to establishing or foreshadowing plot points, or story elements, or characters, or anything for any story outside of this one. This is a complaint that MCU movies get hit with a lot, and I rarely think it holds water. This idea that just because a movie or show has a supporting character who's confirmed to appear in another project, then any scene featuring that character is then a quote-unquote trailer for that upcoming project. It's a belief born out of a very twisted, simplistic mindset, I think. One that goes into all of these movies refusing to engage with them as stories first. It's just such a lazy, bad faith criticism. I know this character is central to a future film, so I can only process their involvement in this one as a bald-faced advertisement, even though nothing about the actual content of their scenes is suggestive of that. Really look me in the eyes and claim that any of this is on the same fundamental level as, say, Batman v Superman literally stopping its narrative dead, so a minor supporting character who already doesn't serve the story can watch a minute of footage from other completely irrelevant cameos. Yes, it's 7 years later, and I'm still aghast at how bad that particular example of this supposed practice is. Rewatch that movie and then tell me that Val's scenes in Wakanda Forever aren't at least serving a story purpose by comparison. Speaking of which, the more substantial criticism of the scenes between Valentina and Everett Ross is that they don't serve a story purpose, or at least don't serve enough of a story purpose to justify the screen time they eat up. First of all, while I didn't time it exactly, I can approximate that Val's screen time in Wakanda Forever generously totals at just under 6 minutes of this nearly 3-hour movie. And of all her scenes, only the last one goes on longer than 1 minute and 10 seconds. So let's stop pretending that her involvement is some big drain on the meat of the film lengthwise. I've also heard it suggested that Val and Ross are both basically tokens, placed in the movie so that white audiences won't get too uncomfortable watching a story about black and brown people. Yes, really. And you know, I'd lend that suggestion a bit of credence if I didn't see it mostly coming from white critics. Which, you know, just feels very performative and disingenuous to me. Like, just trust me when I say that you're not doing audiences of color any favors when you implicitly suggest white characters can only exist in our stories as a means of placating racists. It's weird and unnecessary. All of this belies the bigger underlying issue, though, which is that Val Defontaine and Everett Ross are here first and foremost to serve a story purpose. The thing that makes the whole character as living advertisement complaint silly for this film, but also the MCU in general, is that almost every example takes the form of a character who the franchise seeks to familiarize the audience with, yes, but who also does serve a worthwhile narrative purpose in a given film. For instance, Captain America Civil War introduced Black Panther, who, far from being just a walking trailer for his own movie, has a fully formed character arc running parallel to the two protagonists of that film, and also gave us Spider-Man, who provides a unique perspective on the film's central conflict and a thematic contrast to the characters he interacts with. And for Val and Ross, their scenes are literally all about bolstering Wakanda Forever's anti-colonialist themes. Val is all of Namor's fears made manifest, and Ross serves as an example of how well-intentioned white people / Westerners ultimately can't change the system by working within it. After a couple of MCU appearances where she's mainly just dropped in, had some vague machinations and one-liners, then left, think this use of Valentina is the first to solidify her as a foreboding antagonistic force. It's specifically her final scene which ties together Val's role in the movie as the ultimate extreme of the sly, cold, colonizer instinct. With the conflict between Shuri and Namor being rooted in the danger that colonization still represents, and their polar opposite approaches to that problem, Val is the force that proves Namor's fears entirely founded. The colonizer who, unlike the UN members at the top of the film, is utterly brazen, doesn't bother to perform civility when confronted about her intentions, and who can't be talked down by appeals to reason or empathy. Conversely, Ross is the ideal of an ally taking the form of a member of an outside state. It's really his interactions with Wakanda which, alongside the existence of Riri, provides a justification beyond more abstract human empathy for why the country as a whole isn't willing to burn down the world the way that Talokan is. Which, is kind of an important thing to have established if the entire conflict is going to stem from that disagreement. Yeah, that abstract human empathy thing accounts for a lot, but for one, Talokan is a dark mirror for Wakanda's old isolationist habits, and Everett has always served as the means by which those habits were slowly changed. And for two, ideological conflict will always land better, I think, when you can tie it into something interpersonal. And hey, you might say, why is Val necessary when we already have the scene at the UN, which displays Western countries like France willing to use underhanded, violent tactics against Wakanda in search of vibranium? To which I'd say, emphasis. And emphasizing a really necessary point given it's the antagonist's entire motivation. See, the thing that separates Namor from Killmonger, the thing that basically allows Shuri to risk becoming Killmonger in the climax of the film in opposition to Namor, is that while Killmonger was a villain who took pleasure and satisfaction in doing violence, and whose rhetoric was ultimately pretense for emotional revenge at the world for hurting him, Namor is actually a figure who's consciously, wholly concerned about his political situation. And let's face it, Namor's fear and hatred of the surface world, the extremes that he goes to break Wakanda down into the ally he feels will help him tear the world apart, it would all come off super unreasonable and even a little contrived if we weren't getting constant reminders at how little the world has actually changed. Val is that reminder. The reminder of how justified Namor's fear actually is. The reminder that this time, the political commentary inherent in our conflict exists not just in our villains' circumstances and their rhetoric, but in every part of their decision-making. Wakanda Forever is a movie about how the global systemic forces that Valentina Allegra Defontaine represents can turn people and cultures of color against each other in the race to avoid subjugation. I'd say it's a pretty meaningful role for a character with less than 6 minutes of screen time to serve. What point am I really trying to make with all this? I don't know, I guess among other things, it still just annoys me that we're in an era where the MCU has never been more maligned, and if the point of criticizing the franchise is hopefully to see it improve, I'd like it if less of those recurring critiques were so seemingly deliberately reductive. Engaging almost every movie more as the cultural idea of what a Marvel film is, before even thinking to engage with it as an individual film making creative decisions for a self-contained narrative. I don't expect a fraction of enough people to see this that it accomplishes anything on that front, but it might help me to vent a bit. And if even one person comes out of this video appreciating this film more, or willing to approach this franchise with a more nuanced perspective, then I'll consider that a win. Am I making any sense to anyone? Am I just going on about nothing? Who knows? You tell me. How do you feel about these characters and their involvement in the film? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe for more like this, and I'll see you in the future.